going to talk about the changes that hopefully will be taking place in the U.S. military very soon in January after Donald Trump takes office. The reason that got me started on this is the draft executive order that Donald Trump was talking about, apparently, somebody was talking about in the Trump transition team. And they are saying that they're going to put together a panel of not just officers. This is what makes this really cool. It's not just officers, it's going to be non-commissioned officers as well, which is awesome. They're going to go through the ranks of the higher levels of the U.S. military and clean house. This is spectacular. This is something that is needed to happen for a long time. The U.S. military is extremely top heavy. The number of officers in the U.S. military is about 20% of the entire force. We got 232,000 officers out of just over 1 million total active duty personnel. It's more than we ought to have. But on top of that, they have a very hard time recruiting the incoming new soldiers that they need to keep the U.S. military running. They have more people retiring and leaving the military than they have coming in. And it's been that way for a while. And they're really falling short. That says the United States military right now is not able to handle even one major regional conflict effectively, much less two. And the goal, if you didn't know, is for the United States to be able to simultaneously handle two major conflicts at the same time. Because we have been the guarantors of the safety of the high seas for many years. And that takes a lot of resources. And if you say, we shouldn't be the world's policeman, okay, but if we don't do it, that means there is no safety on the high seas. And that means that world trade could come to a screeching halt anytime some bunch of jackwagons like the Houthis decide to start lobbing missiles at people. And if you've wondered why the United States has not done too well at stopping the Houthis over the last year, it's for this reason. The U.S. military is actually not as capable as we would like them to be, not near as capable as they once were. Now, we got tons and tons of chiefs, but we don't have a lot of Indians. And that's a big problem. This is the executive summary of the 2024 Index of U.S. Military Strength. For your reading pleasure, I will put the link to this up on chuckholton.com, which goes to the locals over there, and you'll be able to read it. Let me just go through what they found. The U.S. Army is rated marginal. They were short by 15,000 recruits this year. That means they only met 77% of their recruiting goals. The Navy is even worse. They rated the Navy as weak. The current fleet stands at 297 ships. They say that the military's overall goals say that we need to have 400 ships in order to secure global shipping and other interests around the world. Now, the Air Force is even worse. They're rated as very weak. They need 1,200 active combat-ready fighter aircraft, but they've only got less than 900, which is about 75% of what's required. The capability of the aircraft they have is even worse. They say only about 70% or less of the aircraft we have are actually mission capable. And we don't have enough pilots to fly the aircraft that can actually get in the air. Now, I just want to say, this is coming from the Heritage Foundation, a very respected source. However, from my own anecdotal experience, I can say that this is 100% true. The United States Marines are the only U.S. military branch that actually was rated as strong in this report this year. There's good news about that, and there's bad news about that. The good news is that they were rated as strong because they have been focusing on modernization. And being able to handle a major conflict. This is the bad news, is that in their restructuring the Marine Corps and upgrading the technology and everything like that, they actually cut out 19,000 Marine Corps infantry slots. So they made the Marine Corps that much smaller, which made it easier for them to meet their recruiting goals pretty significantly. They were only about 70% of what they were. The Space Force was rated at marginal. I don't know, what does the Space Force even do? I don't understand that. The nuclear forces of the United States were rated as marginal, and that's because of outdated nuclear delivery systems and reliability concerns with our nuclear arsenal. And this is something that you see across this report over and over again, that the United States is operating with outdated equipment, that the upgrades technologically that we have been working on are all still in the phases where they're being built or they're being planned, but they're not actually getting out there into the troops' hands. This is all public record. I found all of this information on the Heritage Foundation's website. And again, I will post a link to it. Obviously, the US military is hurting in its readiness, its training, its equipment, its technology. And now let's talk about recruiting. There's a huge crisis in recruiting that has been going on for a long time. Just this year, the Army missed its target by 15,000 soldiers. The Navy fell short by 7,000. The Air Force fell short by 10,000. And a large portion of the reason for that wasn't even because they didn't have enough people volunteering, although that is a huge problem. But of the people who volunteered, only 23% are actually eligible to serve in the military without a waiver. When I was in the military, you would have been completely disqualified for being a transvestite. Now that's celebrated. A lot of people are just overweight, out of shape, and literally cannot meet the requirements. 6 years ago, when my son was going into the military, he went to the military entrance processing station in Glenjean, West Virginia. And that day, there were 40 people who showed up to try to enlist. The first thing they did was give them the ASVAB test. You only have to get a 30% on that test to pass. Of the 40 people that took the ASVAB test that morning, 30 of them failed. Fully 3/4 of them could not pass the ASVAB test. Fortunately, my son, being homeschooled, was one who passed. He got an 88 and qualified to do whatever he wanted to do. So he went on to the physical test. So there were 10 people left who passed the written test that had to go on to the physical fitness test. This is not how many push-ups you can do. This is just take all your clothes off and let them poke and prod and look at every corner of your body and make sure you don't have some serious problem. Of the 10 people that went through that process, only 4 people passed. So 10% of the total number of people who tried to sign up that day were able to actually join the military and get sworn in. And that was 6 years ago. The number is lower now. They say now the number is closer to about 23% that are able to pass the test. And then of those people, it's an even lower number. It's so low that they've had to start taking people who are not physically able to meet the standards of basic training and put them into a pre-basic training program to try to bring them up to the standards. If we get into a situation like Ukraine was in, we're going to have a really hard time getting enough people who are physically, mentally, and emotionally capable of joining the military, to say nothing of their actual willingness to. So willingness to serve, only 25% of US young people age 17 to 24 are willing to even consider military service because they don't trust the leadership and they believe that the military has been too politicized. Now, I want you to focus on that last thing I just said. They believe the military is too politicized. See, it's not that there are not plenty of people out there who could join the ranks of the military. It's that we're not recruiting for that demographic anymore. The US military was always more conservative than the society at large. That's not really the case anymore. Since the Obama administration, the military has been actively working to drive off the people that are conservatives and to recruit people who are on the left. Even during the first Trump administration, it was pretty difficult because you had a lot of holdover officers from the Obama administration that were hardcore leftists. And they just don't want the publicity. They don't want the American people to know what the US military is doing or not doing. They don't want reporting to get out on the state of the American military. All of that to say that word gets out about how they're treating the US troops. The food is not up to snuff in talking with the soldiers that I talked to. Their training is being curtailed in favor of classroom stuff that really doesn't matter. The last deployment my son did was to Poland, and they were basically there as placeholders, and they just put them in a bunch of tents out in a farmer's field somewhere, and they left them there. Wouldn't let him go to town, wasn't a town to go to nearby. And he was out there for 9.5 months. Horrific. So they don't prioritize morale, welfare, recreation like they used to. When I was in the military, we could get passes virtually every weekend or even at night when we were deployed someplace. But nowadays, the officer corps is far too worried about their next promotion. And if anybody gets in trouble on a deployment, that's going to reflect poorly on that commander. And so they just won't let them go anywhere. They're far too risk averse. The whole point of the military is for it to be the absolutely most lethal force on planet Earth. It should be so lethal that nobody wants to mess with it. And then we won't ever have to use it. That was the whole idea behind the US military when I was in the military 35 years ago. That's not the idea now. It's all about being kinder and gentler. Trump's plan for reform, as I mentioned, is a warrior board and a military overhaul. This proposed executive order would establish a board of retired officers and non-commissioned officers to assess all current 3- and 4-star generals and admirals, identify and retire immediately politically focused people or officers who underperformed, fast tracking their retirement within 30 days. If they got rid of 80%, 85% of all of the general officers in the US military, the whole thing would run smoother, less costly, everything would get done faster, and be a whole lot less stupidity going on. If we are going to get back to the kind of peace through strength that President Ronald Reagan talked about, we're going to have to do a lot more recruiting. But before we can recruit, we're going to have to improve the gene pool. So this doesn't come down on the military shoulders ultimately. It comes down on the shoulders of the parents and the teachers who act like they're raising pets and not men. If you don't want your son doing anything dangerous, you're trying to raise a poodle, not a man. If you have a young man in your life, a son or a grandson, or if you know somebody who does, I want you to look into this and recommend it to them. It's the International Alert Academy. It's a 1-year course for young men that just got out of high school that is intended to forge them from boys to men in that year. It is one of the most effective ways I have seen for people to prepare their sons to be useful human beings, no matter what the world throws at them. So if you know a young man and you want him to be prepared for whatever life throws at him, think about sending him to the Alert Academy. It is definitely worth looking into. Now, if you've got questions, I've got answers, and I want to go answer your questions over on Locals. So if you go to chuckholton.com, you can sign up there as a subscriber or a supporter. Subscriber is free, supporter is $7 a month or $70 a year. If you become a supporter over there, you can get a free download of my book, Death of Civilization, which just came out. All you have to do is just become a supporter. You can download the PDF of the book. All right, we'll see you later. God bless you. Take care.